Welcome to Retail's Most Wanted, the podcast that examines the latest issues related to organized retail crime and how retailers and policymakers are fighting back against today's organized crime syndicates. I'm Marty Carpenter, and coming up today, our conversation with Miguel Martinez. He's the vice president at Pinkerton with more than 2 decades of experience. He specializes in enterprise risk management, security intelligence, and cross-border operations, helping clients build long-term strategies. On today's episode, Miguel joins us to break down what's driving supply chain vulnerability and what practical prevention and response looks like from the front lines. That conversation's coming up right after this word from our sponsor. Retail's Most Wanted is brought to you in partnership with LVT, securing physical environments through intelligent automation. Learn more at lvt.com. That's lvt.com. We're joined now by Miguel Martinez. He's the vice president at Pinkerton. Miguel, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's set the landscape. When you look at cargo theft right now, what's changed in the last, say, 12 to 24 months?
It's a good question because we definitely analyze the trends and the changes in the industry. And one of the things we've noticed is that the individuals that are committing these crimes are now more sophisticated than ever, using AI tools, using technology to pretty much cause, the cargo losses, right? So from being opportunistic crime to more of a strategic crime, we're starting to see that it's organized, right? It's not where just individual, going up to a trailer and hijacking it. It's more, it takes a lot of planning, a lot of resources, and also intelligence that's being used by the bad people. So it's shifting also towards more insider threats versus external threats. So we're monitoring that activity as well.
So many shippers and transportation companies hesitate to speak publicly when they've been the victims of cargo theft. From your perspective, what is it that they're most afraid of, or what makes them most hesitant?
Mostly brand reputation. Brand reputation would be the big one. Obviously, they want to get their product to their customers. If there's any delays in the transportation of these items, then it causes them to lose business. Right? We've seen organizations pretty much go bankrupt. So some of the larger shippers are hesitant to share that information because it impacts also the cost of transportation. Right? It could also insurance premiums go up. So for them, it's a matter of making sure they have the right information to make decisions, right? And brand reputation would be the big one for me.
Yeah. I think when people hear the term cargo theft, they imagine like an opportunistic crime. I know in my brain, I always picture like a train and someone disconnecting a car from the train while the train pulls off.
Right.
I know it's not just that, but how often is this actually an organized crime event? And what does that look like at the high level?
Well, it is organized. I mean, it's no longer, as I mentioned earlier, opportunistic, right? There is still that happens in some of the larger metropolitan areas like Ontario, which is a major distribution center for California. You still have the thefts that occur in some of the rest stops. But recently, we're starting to see more sophistication in terms of the theft, right? So when I mentioned earlier about insider threats, that's more relevant now than ever because these organizations are infiltrating some of these larger distribution centers, and they're the ones that are being, they're geared towards providing information to the external people that are going to take the cargo, right? So you get the bill of lading, you get the data on the product, and it goes through a process of individuals. And then obviously we've noticed too that some of the drivers or some of the carriers are involved. So understanding that it's like a business for them, right? They have intelligence, they have logistics, they have operations, and they have leadership that's obviously making all the money, right? And we see also that sometimes it's organizations based out of the U.S. It could be Eastern Europe, it could be Latin America. So it's not necessarily in the United States, but it's very, very organized operation.
I know in a lot of crimes, they talk about the importance of the first 24 hours. And I think that's the case with cargo theft as well. In your experience, what separates recoverable cases from non-recoverable cases? What do you wish companies did immediately after theft is discovered?
Well, definitely. I mean, I think from my perspective, having a good understanding of your routes, the risk involved with your routes, really having a compliance, not necessarily for the drivers, but for your suppliers, making sure that you properly vet them, have the proper, background checks done. Because what we notice is some of these larger shippers, they have a third party provider, then that third party has another third party, and it kind of starts to dilute kind of the compliance aspect. So, but for me is having a plan, not being reactive, being more proactive, and ensuring that there's proper steps that are followed. Like, for example, documenting the loss. If there's a significant loss, then having an investigator go out there and document for evidence purposes, and also for insurance purposes. Kind of a proof of loss. That's very important. Some clients wait for law enforcement, which is great. I think law enforcement should get the first call. But in terms of documenting the loss for future litigation or future actions is something that I wish customers would do more, because then it prevents them from spending more money, right, on investigating the crime versus having the items that are going to be necessary to file a lawsuit or even use that for prosecution if it gets to that. So documentation is critical, and having a plan that could be executed after the loss is very important.
Yeah. I want to talk to you a little bit about inside versus outside risk. How should companies think about the balance between external threats and internal vulnerabilities?
They're both connected. They're both connected. There's systems that help you aggregate some of the insider threat processes. It's elaborate, right? They have the data leak. You have they can infiltrate social engineering. Is very relevant in that. But it's really important that your systems are tested. That you evaluate. Who manages the data, right? And look at the chain or the tree of where is your potential vulnerability, right? So you have, a GM of a distribution center. He probably has access to all the data. We have to evaluate and assess where is a critical point where that data might leak to an external party, right? Obviously nowadays with computers and systems, it's so easy for individuals to send information out. So having a good system, cybersecurity, I would say, plays a big role in securing the data, because data leaks are very prevalent in this type of activity.
So if a company wants to reduce risk and they come to you, where do you usually start, or does that totally depend on the situation?
It depends on the situation, but we always treat this as kind of an assessment, because I don't know the internal processes and procedures of an organization. So we want to go in there with a fresh set of eyes. So what we typically do is we engage first as an assessment of their whole logistical process, right? From the time a shipment arrives to where it leaves, the security of that shipment, and then from there we structure kind of the security, the security components. Whether you need to have cameras, or you need to be better at knowing your customers or knowing your vendors, right? Your background checks. So we start to design the proper security components to prevent that from. Cargo theft is going to occur regardless, right? But having a strong understanding of where your vulnerabilities are is what leads our assessment to make those decisions, right? Whether we need to provide, an escort for high value cargo, or we just need to monitor the truck via, the tools and technology that are out there. Depends on the assessment.
Let's talk a little bit about high-value cargo and escorts. Pinkerton mentioned things like high-value escorts and cargo security. So at a conceptual level, what kinds of shipments or scenarios justify that kind of approach, and what problem is it designed to solve?
So we have a customer that I'll use that example from a customer now that their threshold is $2 million worth of cargo, and it's electronics. But it could also be pharmaceutical, right? It depends on also it's usually the amount of money, and what the main objective for that is to obviously monitor, the transit or the cargo in transit, document any irregularities to whether the driver stops at certain locations, or engages with people. We're monitoring all that activity, and we're also there to obviously prevent a theft from occurring. We've had situations where we've had to bring in law enforcement. So we're kind of the eyes and ears of that transport. So we're able to communicate quickly if we see something that needs to be, needs police response, and we're there to also, support. But also too is to document. If there is a loss, right, we're there to document. We might not be able to prevent it per se, because maybe the bad guys have weapons, or there's obviously, sometimes some limitations on what we can do. But it is a good process to document it for insurance purposes, even for the own company's benefit.
Let's talk about partnership with law enforcement. What does effective collaboration with law enforcement or with task forces look like from your perspective?
We encourage that with every engagement. This is necessary. We're part of organized retail crime alliances across the country, and the sharing of information from public and private sector is critical. That's the only way we identify groups of interest, people of interest. If we don't share that information, then we're never going to really, solve the problem. But the collaboration with law enforcement for us, from Pinkerton perspective, is key. I mean, understanding what task force are focusing on what products, because there's, obviously the highway patrol, you have the municipal, police, they have different mandates, right? But when the task force, they all come together for ultimate goal, which is to combat cargo theft. And again, for me, it's very important that we're part of that, of those units.
I want to talk about measuring supply chain integrity as well. If you had to give a security leader a short list of metrics that indicate, hey, we're reducing cargo theft risk, what are the things that you would track?
I would say cargo theft incident rate, right? I would say that's one. Number two would be loss per maybe 1,000 shipments. Got to gauge out of 1,000 shipments, how many losses have we had, right? I would also say securing the routing compliance rate, right? What is, the threshold for them, and the percentage of shipments that are pretty much go through high risk zones, because that's important, because if it's comparing to, say, maybe a suburb in Minneapolis versus, say, say Long Beach, California, very different, right? Very different outcomes and very different metrics that you can, obtain just identifying those high risk areas. And with that, you can also make adjustments to your security. You can make adjustments to the type of carriers you're going to be using, maybe more, with technology. So it depends, again, on those metrics.
I'm going to get you out of here on this one. For companies listening that, say, don't have a huge security budget, what are the first 3 moves that meaningfully reduce risk without overhauling an entire supply chain?
Number one is knowing your supply chain. Really, taking the time to conduct thorough background checks on your supply chain, using tools, technology tools, to maybe track the high value loads or the cargo loads, but also, again, testing your security, right? Maybe we have clients that every 3 months they engage us to test their security, right? Try to infiltrate their distribution center, try to access information from their offices, right? So testing, your procedures is very important. So those are 3 would be, and they're very inexpensive. You don't have to have a 6-figure engagement to tackle those issues. But I would say those 3 would be the ones.
Really good advice. Miguel Martinez is Vice President at Pinkerton. Miguel, thank you for your work fighting back against organized retail crime and cargo theft. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for your time.
All right, that's it for this episode of Retail's Most Wanted. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, LVT. Don't forget to hit that subscribe or follow button so you can catch each new episode. We drop one every 2 weeks. We're also on X, we're on LinkedIn, and we're on YouTube, so follow us there. And as always, thanks for being with us, and keep up the good fight.